Hi everybody. So I'd like to start by asking you to think about some of the biggest business success stories of the last 10 to 15 years. Okay, the kind of brands and the kind of businesses that are usually used in the same sentence as innovators, as disruptors. Okay? Everyone has one. Now, those words, innovators and disruptors, only tell half the story, right? Let's think about Facebook, okay? Facebook. We all use it, I'm sure. But Facebook is also all about trolls, about bots, about fake accounts, about fake news. Maybe you thought about Airbnb. Okay, but Airbnb is also about gentrification, about rising house prices in cities everywhere from Amsterdam to Sao Paulo. Or maybe you thought about Uber, who have been in the news a lot recently thanks to sexual harassment charges, or maybe their worker welfare issues. Or maybe you thought about Amazon, who have also been in the news for worker welfare issues and also issues around them having a monopoly over a market. Now, we all still use these products, we all still use these services. They're easy, they're cheaper. You know, we can't feel bad about choosing to use them. But most of us have a negative perception about many of these kinds of businesses. And sometimes I feel like these businesses don't really care about that. They're not really doing that much to change our minds. So if you think about some of the things that have happened just this week, in Washington, D.C., representatives from Facebook, from Google, and from Twitter were invited to congressional hearings that were examining the implications of, shall we say, foreign interest in the US presidential elections. And one of the senators at the hearing said, and I quote, that she was disappointed with Facebook, with Google, and with Twitter. She was disappointed because they didn't send their CEOs to attend the hearings, because they didn't really seem to care that much about what they did then and how they're going to fix the problem in the future. So we're in this moment with technology and with so many businesses that seem to control our lives that we seem to have no power over. And today I want to ask about how we got here and what lessons we can learn from that story that we can take into the future that will allow us to build technology solutions and brands and businesses that are completely different. So I'd like you to all indulge in a little bit of time travel with me. I'd like to go back to California, to the 1960s. To the hippie movement. Now, the parallels between the hippie movement and early digital and web culture are well documented. Hippies were a group of people who looked at the world and wanted to make it better. You know, they'd seen things happen, 2 world wars, other very destructive events happen, and they thought that they could make the future better. And they were high, quite literally, on ideas of freedom, of personal expression, of liberation, of empowerment, of creativity, really positive things. They were optimists. And what they did was they thought that they could come together, they could use all of that positivity and all of that optimism and change the narrative. And out of that culture came people like this. So this is Marshall McLuhan. You probably know him through his most famous sentence, which is, "The medium is the message." He was a philosopher and a media theorist, and he predicted that the rise of technology would allow people to take control from institutions, from governments, and allow them to do things that they wanted in their own lives. It would give them power. And now we know that that's kind of a spookily accurate prediction. He lived in a time where there was also things like this. So this is the Whole Earth catalogue. This is something that was first released in 1968. And it was all about helping hippies to understand how to live a DIY, self-sufficient lifestyle. You can look through some of these back issues on Google now, and in some ways it's almost like an early Google. It's a collection of random things that allow you to have information that can empower you. And of course, I can't talk about the sort of early hippie movement unless I talk about unless I talk about these guys as well, okay? These people need no introduction. Because the truth is that you can draw a direct line between the hippie culture, between Steve Jobs, and the tech companies that exist today. But here's the thing. Something happened to that early optimism of the hippies, okay? Many big tech companies would still say that they are optimists. You know, Mark Zuckerberg says very regularly, and probably quite annoyingly, I am an optimist. But big tech optimism is kind of different to hippie optimism. Big tech optimism goes a little bit something like this. It says, everybody is fundamentally good. Therefore, you don't need traditional structures, governments, institutions. You have the power in you to govern yourself. But what you need is you need ways to connect yourselves, or you need platforms to help you do it. And that's where these tech companies come in, and this is where they make money, where they have a place in our lives. They have essentially co-opted optimism for profit. Now maybe you might think I'm cynical, and perhaps there's a grain of truth in that. But it's also interesting to see that people who are deeply ingrained in Silicon Valley culture have some of these thoughts as well. So this quote comes from Evan Williams. He gave an interview with the New York Times in May this year, and Evan, if you don't know, was the founder of Blogger. He was a co-founder of Twitter, and he's the current CEO of Medium. All platforms that are about bringing people together. And he said, I thought that once everybody could speak freely and exchange information and ideas, the world would automatically be a better place. I was wrong. Can you imagine other tech companies or any other big Silicon Valley figures admitting that what they did wasn't always for the good of humanity? It's a really extraordinary point of view to take by saying that what we are doing is maybe not always doing the right thing. And this point of view that he has is played out again and again in countless stats and countless surveys. For example, 41% of Americans have been personally subjected to harassment online. 66% have seen it happen to somebody that they know. People who spend more than 2 hours a day on social media platforms have twice the perceived social isolation of people who spend less than half an hour a day on those platforms. 45% of UK adults say they feel lonely at least some of the time. And this is a particularly significant study because it was held and asked people who were under the age of 60, so the 60 plus demographic, often for different reasons feels isolated and alone. Now this feeling is translating to younger demographics. Those are all really worrying stats. Not just for innovators or people that live in Silicon Valley or people that are creating tech products, but for all of us. Because it's really about asking us, is the technology that we're using helping us to create a vision of humanity that we want to see? Is it helping us to really come together and to really make life meaningful for everybody? And the short answer has to be no. But it's really easy to ask that question, and it's actually a lot more difficult to think about how you can solve that. How can you create tech products that take something from those early hippies, from that optimism that they had, and use it to create something that can enrich and meaningfully enhance us as humans? And I'm not saying we're going to solve that here tonight. That is a big question to ask and a big thing to think about. But what I'd like to do now is to show you some examples of some technologies that are using the power that they have and the things that they can do in really interesting ways, in ways that are bridging gaps between people and between events and situations that might actually make us all better. So the first piece of technology, or the first innovation that I want to talk about, is something called Huddle. And Huddle is an app that allows you to upload videos of yourself talking about mental health issues. And it is primarily aimed at people who have mental health issues. something that still remains a taboo in this society even today. So the idea is that you upload videos of yourself talking about anxiety, about body image, about whatever your mental health issue is. You upload it into the app and it creates this repository of videos. People can watch them, and if they think that they can share something that's helpful to you, or if they think you've given something to them that's helpful, they can contact you. You can also, because the issue of mental health is, still will probably be for quite some time, so sensitive, upload things anonymously. The problem with anonymous content is that it hasn't gone so well in the past, right? Bullies, trolls, all these kinds of issues have plagued lots of anonymous platforms that have tried this kind of thing in the past. What this does that's different is that it uses algorithms to weed out poor behaviour before that behaviour happens. So it's about making this space safe for the people that need it and using new technologies to do that. So that's thinking about how technology can empower a group of people that is often overlooked by traditional tech products and traditional tech services. We already touched very briefly on the issue of the US presidential election. And one of the big things that fell out of that, and of course closer to home out of Brexit too, was the idea of the filter bubble and how hard it is to discover opinions that are conflicting to our own. These kinds of platforms like Facebook reflect the things back to us that we like. You know, we exist in this bubble of coziness, I like to call it. What this app does, hide from the other side, is it matches you with people who have different political opinions to you. So we're all used to using apps like Tinder or Bumble to, hook up with people, to find dates. This is taking that kind of platform, that kind of behaviour, and applying it to something that's slightly different. And it doesn't just help you find somebody who has a different opinion to you, it also suggests ways you can start conversations with them that are meaningful, that are useful, and that will probably go beyond 5 minutes of just shouting about why each other is wrong. Now, I obviously can't talk about new technologies and how these are changing the world in which we live in without talking about one of the biggest new technologies at the moment, which is virtual reality. Virtual reality is obviously still in its infancy for quite a lot of people, and it's still a technology that is being developed even as we speak. There are new ways of adding scent to virtuality, so you can make virtual reality experiences more real. There's also new virtual reality experiences that are linked to brainwave readers, so you can control how you move around in the VR space simply by using your mind. But perhaps the biggest thing that VR can offer us is the idea of empathy. Lots of people are worried about virtual reality because they think it will actually make us more isolated. We have these headsets on, we live in these worlds that are for our eyes only. But what about if virtual reality really can help us be more, or have more empathy for other people's situations? We've talked a lot in the past about how film and books are a great empathy driver. Perhaps this could be even more powerful than that. So this is a training program that was developed by the NFL in partnership with Stanford University, and it allowed you to immerse yourself in a situation that was totally foreign to you. So if you were a white man, for example, you could experience what life was like as a black woman. The kind of things that you would never fully understand until you maybe stood in those shoes. Now, I'm not saying that a virtual reality experience is going to completely change everybody's attitude to racism or to other issues that are ingrained in human society. Like, they're not. But this is all about using technology to think about how it can push us forward, about how it can make us better as humans. And one of the things that always comes up when we think about some of the big issues with tech companies in Silicon Valley, if you think about the slides I just showed you just now, they were mostly populated by white men. And that is the problem as well, because these technologies are being created by one person, perhaps for a person who looks a lot like them. And we're never truly going to have technologies that are much more expansive and that are much more generous in what they give back to us unless we start changing that narrative as well. The final point I would like to leave you with when it comes to tech innovation is about how it's all about disrupting the right things. Now, this innovation has a really nice narrative to it. It was first developed by somebody at university in the US, and he called it Do Not Pay. And it was essentially a chatbot that helped you to contest parking tickets. So if you got a parking ticket, the chatbot would help you understand whether you had any grounds in which to contest it, who you sent those things to, why you might be able to contest it. And it managed to overturn over 160,000 parking tickets in London and New York. Okay, that's quite impressive. But then he decided to do something quite interesting with this technology. He decided to use it for something completely different. For people who were in vulnerable housing situations, who were maybe at risk of being evicted by landlords, they could use a totally different version of the chatbot, but one that worked in exactly the same way, to access legal advice about how long they could stay in their property, what their legal rights were, where they could get free legal counsel, who could help them write letters, what the rules were. And then in its most recent iteration, the Do Not Pay chatbot is helping people in the US challenge a big insurance company that had a data breach when lots of people's data was stolen and lots of people had sort of financial issues as a result of it. It's helping them understand what their rights are in relation to that kind of issue. So that is a chatbot that has taken a really interesting journey from something that is, okay, annoying, parking tickets, to something that can really fundamentally impact how someone lives, their housing situation. So maybe it's also all about thinking about how technology can disrupt the right things. You know, of course, there will always be juiceroo juicers that help us pulverize our fruit more quickly. We have to accept that there is always going to be innovations and tech products that are perhaps not really for the good of humanity. But that at the same time, we should always be striving to think about how we can, at the same time, think about ones that do. So maybe you work for a startup. Maybe you work for a big company. Maybe one day you want to be a startup creator yourself. The challenge for all of us is thinking about how we can learn from that early optimism that really was intrinsic to the very earliest web and digital cultures, and how we can bring them to bear on the products, on the services, on the platforms, and on the technology that we are creating today. Because we are all in this together, and it's up to all of us to think about how we can create connections and create new things that can help drive all of us forward into a better place.